Hi folks, welcome to Parliament Hill. It's Tuesday, June 14th, 2016, and today, like so many other days, I come up on the hill with this sign and a petition clipboard, as well as a flyer that I got from the Autism Society of Canada, all of which call on the government to develop, in collaboration with the provinces, a National Autism Strategy. And what we're looking for, parents of children with autism, is a comprehensive approach that the governments would use to improve the lives of children with autism and their families. And a cornerstone of that has got to include access to treatment under Medicare. One of the problems in this country, which I found out the hard way when my own son was diagnosed, is that Medicare, our universal public health care system, which is supposed to provide every Canadian with his core health care needs, doesn't actually cover autism treatment. Now, what is autism? Autism is a neurological disorder. The cause and the cure are not known, but a treatment is. And what autism as a disorder impairs a person's ability to communicate. My own son, for example, is nonverbal and not able to speak. It interferes with their ability to engage in normal social relations. And there's also problems with regard to repetitive behaviors. Now, the thing is that since the 1980s, the scientific community has known through numerous studies that the application of intensive behavior intervention therapy, that's IBI, based on the principles of applied behavior analysis, that's ABA, will help a huge number of these children develop to the point where, if they're given the treatment early enough and intensely enough for long enough, they can actually enter the school system and function at the average level. For any parent of a child with autism, that's the dream. And when Ivar Lovaas first made his breakthrough study in 1987 out of UCLA, there were 60 kids in a study who some got 40 hours a week of ABA, IBI treatment, some got 20, and some got none. And of the group of 20 that got 40 hours a week of therapy, 47% of them were able to develop to the point where they were able to enter grade 1 and function at the average level. That study has been replicated on several occasions since then, and while the numbers may change with regard to the students who do the best, the overall message of these studies is that the kids improve. There's a very small group, a very small number that don't actually respond to it. Most will, and this is the best way, and in fact the only way, to really provide the maximum amount of development and treatment. It's important that these kids get this treatment as early as possible, because while they're young, the brain still has this plasticity, and through the repetition of the exercises, the kids' brains can literally be rewired. Now, in Canada, across the country, the provinces are responsible for the delivery of healthcare, and when it comes to autism, they've been doing an absolutely terrible job. In Ontario, the Mike Harris government introduced a preschool autism program in 1999. Good idea, but they didn't give it to the Department of Health, and it's not administered by the hospitals or the medical system. They gave it to the Department of Family or Community Services, which is under-resourced, doesn't have the expertise. They in turn contracted it out to regional service providers. In Eastern Ontario, in Ottawa, it happens to be the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, but you don't just show your OHIP card, your hospital insurance plan card or Medicare card to get the service. You've got to apply, you've got to be put on the waiting list, and when we applied, we were told it's really important that your son get this treatment as soon as possible. And we don't know how long you'll be on the waiting list. Well, we suggest you go to the private sector. Well, my wife and I spent over $40,000 in the first year alone on therapists, and the truth of the matter is that that's not sustainable for us or for most Canadians. And so we've been paying taxes for years thinking Medicare should cover our core healthcare needs, and where is it when you need it? So in British Columbia in the 1990s, a group of families got together and started a court case alleging discrimination under the Charter. When you go to the hospital and you're told you've got autism, you don't get service. Well, if the government has a program and discriminates like that, that's a violation of the Charter. And they won at the court of first instance, and they won at the Court of Appeal when the government appealed it. But then the government of BC appealed it to the Supreme Court of Canada. And the case was heard in 2004. And the decision came out at the end of 2004, a unanimous decision stating that basically anything that involves the spending of money is entirely up to the legislatures. That's these guys, and all of the provincial ones across the country. And what have they done? Well, in Ontario, they had a program that wasn't developed or administered under Medicare, but in 2003, Dalton McGuinty was running to be the premier of the province, and he was approached, along with the other leaders of the parties, by Nancy Morrison, a mother of an autistic child in Toronto, who asked them, do you believe the age 6 cutoff for the preschool autism program is discrimination, and if so, what are you going to do about it? And Dalton McGuinty wrote back to her, and I've got a copy of the email. He specifically said, I believe this is discrimination, and if I'm elected premier, I'll do away with it. Well, he was elected premier, and we had faith in him. But what he did didn't correspond with what he promised, because after he was elected, this court case was going on called Deskin-Weinberg, in which the parents were alleging that the age 6 cutoff was age-based discrimination. And he pursued the case, and then the court ordered the government to stop that age-based discrimination. They found that it was, in fact, discrimination to stop services at the age of 6. Well, the government, the very next business day, announced an appeal of that decision. It went to the Ontario Court of Appeal, and the government won at the Court of Appeal. But the McGuinty government said, out of the kindness of our hearts, that we will continue to offer services past age 6 to those who need it. Well, in fact, we found out the hard way, the unpleasant way, that the government was able to use other alternative means to get rid of kids off the services list at age 6. In our case, for example, they said our son didn't make sufficient progress. So the thing is that we now have a government of Kathleen Wynne, which has just announced a new autism program, part of which involves reducing the age 6 cutoff to age 5. So in other words, we're going backwards, and a lot of people in Ontario are very upset about that in the autism community, and Kathleen Wynne certainly isn't winning over any hearts and minds in our community. So we're going backwards, and in a number of provinces across the country, we've seen some tragic stories. A National Autism Strategy needs to be comprehensive to not only deal with access to Medicare, but also with a number of things relating to services once a child becomes an adult. And to give you an example of how tragic some of the situations are in Canada, in British Columbia, we had a situation about 2 years ago where one mother, a single parent of a 17-year-old child with autism, the son was significantly heavier than she was, and she was no longer able to deal with him when he became violent and aggressive. Although she asked the provincial authorities on a regular basis for assistance in placing him in an appropriate facility or group home, they always said, "Oh, ma'am, we don't have the resources for your child at this time." Well, eventually she lost patience, or was at the end of her rope, and she killed her son, and she killed herself and committed suicide. That's not an isolated case. Unfortunately, a few years ago there was another case in Alberta of a man who had a son, a teenage son with autism, severely affected, who was in a special facility. And the government of Alberta decided that the facility needed to be closed down or something, and informed the family that he was going to be moved to another facility. They visited that other facility, and the father said it just wouldn't do. At least that's what I recall reading in the newspaper. And as a result, he hung his son and then hung himself. And that case too isn't unique. In New Brunswick a few years ago. There was a case of another child who was severely affected by autism, and his parents couldn't control him either when he had violent outbursts. So the government of New Brunswick actually housed the child in a prison while waiting the opening of a space at a facility in Maine before he was ultimately sent to that facility. So that's how New Brunswick deals with their most difficult cases. They put them in prison and then they deport them. These kind of situations shouldn't happen in a country as wealthy, as developed and otherwise civilized as Canada. And so, with the provinces being all over the map and unfortunately not being able to provide children with autism access to adequate treatment under Medicare or adequate post-school facilities, what we need and what we're asking is the federal government to put some money on the table, bring the provinces together and negotiate a deal. In 2004 at the conference center over there, the Martin government organized a meeting with the provincial premiers, and they negotiated a health accord, $40 billion over 10 years. And the federal government contributed to Medicare funds across the country, and in exchange, specific medical services and corresponding service standards were identified and agreed to, but just not autism. We protested in front of that conference center at that time, and now the accord has expired after 10 years, and we're hoping the Liberal government of Trudeau will also negotiate a health accord with the provinces, and that this time autism will be on the table. Now, across this country there's a number of autism organizations and a number of websites. The Autism Society of Canada, or Autism Canada, provided me with a flyer that I distribute to people that approach me and want to talk about autism. It's a copy of an article by Kathleen O'Grady that was published in the Hill Times in December of 2015 called "All I Want for Christmas is a National Autism Strategy." And the Autism Canada website's a nice resource place to start. My own favorite, there are two in British Columbia that I really like. One is the Families for Autism Treatment of BC. It's featbc.org, and the Feet BC organization is phenomenal and unrelenting in their dedication to ABA, IBI treatment for kids with autism. And the other one, which I've noted here, is the Medicare for Autism Now organization. And these people as well have one single issue and one mandate that they wish to pursue until they're successful, and that is the inclusion of access to autism treatment, ABA, IBI, under Medicare across this country from coast to coast. So ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening. I hope we have your support. Please pass the message on to your friends and families, and most importantly, to the politicians in your community. We need your help. And one of these days, I hope we'll be able to see autism treatment covered from coast to coast by Medicare. Thank you.